The night shift had a particular kind of stillness, the kind that sat heavy in your chest and made every beep from a monitor feel louder than it should. Mercy General wasn't the kind of hospital that slowed down, even in the early hours, but there were quiet pockets in the maze of corridors where the fluorescent lights buzzed a little softer and nurses could take a breath before the next storm. Alina Reyes, 26 years old and just 2 years into her nursing career, leaned against the nurse's station, pen tucked behind her ear, her hair pulled back into a messy bun that had started unraveling around 3 a.m. She was tired but used to it. Her whole body moved like it had memorized exhaustion. That night had been particularly rough. 2 codes, 1 angry family, a toddler with a fractured arm, and a homeless man she'd found shivering outside the ER entrance. She wrapped him in 2 blankets and stayed until he stopped shaking. Kindness came as second nature to her. It was never showy, never loud. She just gave it away like warmth, like breath. At 4:17 a.m., the call came in. Code trauma male, late 30s, collapsed on the sidewalk. CPR in progress, ETA 2 minutes. Alina snapped to attention. She didn't flinch anymore when those calls came through. She moved quickly, calmly, gloves, gown, station cleared, trauma bay prepped. They wheeled him in on a stretcher, shirt torn open, chest slick with sweat and grit. His skin was pale, lips tinged with blue, no pulse. CPR had been going for nearly 5 minutes already. The paramedic was shouting vitals, but Alina was already pressing into his chest with the heel of her hand, counting under her breath. "Got a name?" she asked between compressions. "No ID, found collapsed near Lincoln and 7th. "Rhythm," the attending shouted. "Still VFib." They shocked him once, then again. Alina's arms ached from the force of the compressions, but she didn't stop. She leaned into every thrust, every breath they gave him, willing the life back into his chest. 12 minutes, someone said. The attending physician looked at Alina. "We're losing him." "Again," she said. They shocked him a third time, and this time his body jerked violently. Then silence. "Sinus rhythm," the monitor read. They all paused, listening. Then the heart monitor began to beep steadily, slowly. Alina stepped back, chest heaving. Sweat poured from her brow. She hadn't even realized she was crying until a tear slipped off her cheek and landed on the man's shoulder. "He's back," someone whispered. The attending clapped her shoulder. "Good work, Reyes." But she didn't move, she kept looking at him. His face, sharp jawline dusted with stubble, a cut over his right brow, skin pale but warm again, seemed oddly familiar. But maybe that was just the adrenaline playing tricks on her. He looked like someone who once had a story to tell, who maybe hadn't planned to collapse on a cold street in the middle of the night. They admitted him under the name John Doe and moved him to the ICU. Alina followed, helping to settle him in. She adjusted his oxygen, checked his IV line, then paused. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer, of course. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She stood there a while longer before slipping a folded note into the drawer beside his bed. It was a habit she had, a quiet ritual. Notes written to unconscious patients. Words they might never read, but words that reminded her of why she did what she did. This one read, "You are still here. That means something. Hold on." She didn't expect him to read it. She didn't expect him to remember her at all. But he would. The man remained unconscious for 3 days. Alina didn't hover. She had other patients, other lives to tend to, but she checked in on him at the start of every shift and again before she clocked out. She always made sure his chart was up to date, his bandages clean, his vitals stable. She adjusted his blanket when it slipped too low, tucked the corners tight like she had with her little brother when they were kids and he was scared of thunderstorms. On the 3rd morning, just past dawn, she entered the room with fresh saline flushes and found him awake. He was staring at the ceiling with a kind of stillness that looked too heavy for someone who'd just come back from the edge. His eyes, green, with a faint ring of gold around the pupils, didn't shift until she spoke. "You're awake." His gaze moved slowly toward her. He looked like he wasn't sure what being alive meant yet. His throat worked, dry and strained. She poured water into a cup and held the straw for him. He took a small sip, then more. "Do you know your name?" she asked gently. He hesitated, his brow furrowed, then relaxed. "Jack," he rasped, "Jack Hart." "Hi, Jack," she said with a small smile. "I'm Alina. You gave us quite a scare." His eyes narrowed like he was trying to remember something beyond the shape of his name. "You collapsed, no ID, no phone. CPR in progress when you came in. You were gone for a bit." He blinked slowly, gone. No pulse for almost 12 minutes. His hand flexed slightly under the blanket. "Why am I here?" "You're here because someone didn't give up on you." He looked at her more closely now, his eyes scanning her face. Was it you? She didn't answer directly. You were lucky. A bystander started CPR until the ambulance came. He stared at her, not letting go of the question with his eyes. She broke the silence by adjusting his monitor, but the air between them had shifted, something raw had opened, something wordless. Later that day, a social worker came in trying to piece together the fragments of his identity. He gave them the basics: no family nearby, a brother estranged. Said he worked in construction, but his eyes flickered when he said it, and Alina knew he was holding something back. That was fine. People did that all the time, especially the ones who'd lost more than they could admit. Over the next few days, Jack began to heal. He was quiet, observant, polite. He asked Alina small questions: what time it was, whether it was raining outside, what kind of coffee she liked. The first time he made her laugh, it surprised them both. "You smile like someone who forgets she can," he said. It flustered her more than it should have. She left the room quickly, blaming it on meds to administer, but her hands trembled when she picked up the next chart. By the end of the week, he was sitting up, eating toast with too much butter, and watching the window like he was trying to learn how to be in the world again. Alina came in to check his stitches and found the note she had written him tucked into the pocket of his hospital gown. "You kept it," she said, surprised. "I read it when I woke up. I didn't know who left it." "I do that sometimes," she admitted. "It's silly." "No," he said quietly, "it saved me." The room went quiet after that. Outside, the sky had begun to soften into spring. He watched her in the way people do when they're trying to memorize the face of someone who changed them. "I don't remember much," he said, "but I remember a voice, counting, calm. I think it was yours." She nodded once, throat too tight to speak. His discharge came sooner than she expected. The attending told him he was stable, his heart strong enough to go, but they recommended follow-up care and a cardiac rehab program. He took the papers in silence, signing what needed to be signed. When Alina walked into his room at the end of her shift, the bed was made, the blankets folded with a kind of reverence. He stood there in clothes someone from the hospital closet had given him, slightly too big, sleeves rolled, shoes a little worn but dry, clean. He turned when she entered. "They're sending me off." "I heard. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." He took a slow breath, "But I will." She smiled, soft and weary. "Just take care of yourself, Jack." He nodded, then stepped closer. He didn't touch her, just stood there for a second like he was memorizing her. "You brought me back." And then he left. She didn't expect to see him again. She told herself she didn't need to. But when she passed by the now empty room, she paused. Something in her chest had shifted the night he'd come back to life. And it hadn't shifted back. 2 weeks passed. The world moved forward as it always did. Day shifts bled into nights. Patients came and went, some with laughter, others in silence. Alina kept going, kept caring, kept folding corners of blankets and offering gentle smiles even when her feet ached and her heart felt thin from the weight of other people's pain. She didn't talk about Jack, not to her coworkers, not to herself. But sometimes, during a lull, she would catch her reflection in the glass of a medication cabinet and remember how he'd looked at her, like she was the last tether he had in the world. Then one Friday morning, her phone rang. She was off that day, wearing a soft old sweater and sitting on her small apartment balcony with a cup of tea cooling in her hand. The call came from the front desk at Mercy General. "Hi, Nurse Reyes, there's a man here asking for you. Said his name is Jack Hart. He left something for you." She sat up straight, tea forgotten. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. When she arrived, breathless, her badge still clipped to her coat out of habit, the receptionist handed her a small envelope and pointed toward the main lobby. "He didn't wait," she said he had somewhere to be." Alina opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a small key. "Alina, I've been trying to find the right way to thank you. Nothing seems enough, not for what you gave me back. I'm not good with words, so I've done something instead. The address is below. Come if you want to, no pressure, no expectations, just come see." "Jack." The address was scribbled at the bottom, somewhere in the old part of town near Rose Hill, a neighborhood of red brick homes and tree-lined streets. She stared at it for a long time, the key warm in her palm. That Sunday, curiosity won. She took the bus partly because she didn't know what she was walking into and partly because it gave her time to think. The neighborhood was quiet, a kind of worn elegance to the houses, gardens in bloom, porch swings, wind chimes. The address led her to a modest white house with blue shutters. The lawn was freshly mowed, and a dog barked once from a yard across the street. She stood there unsure until a voice behind her made her turn. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Jack stood a few feet away, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, hands in his coat pockets. He looked stronger, color in his cheeks, the tiredness replaced with something steadier. There was a faint scar over his right brow now, and a light in his eyes that hadn't been there in the hospital. "You left a key," she said. "I wasn't sure how else to say thank you." "You bought this." He nodded. "I didn't really have roots before, moved around a lot. I've been trying to change that." "For me?" she asked, stunned. "For you," he said simply, "because you gave me my life back, and because I wanted you to have something no one could take away." Her brows furrowed. "Jack, I don't need a house." "I know," he said, stepping closer, "but maybe you need a place to rest, a place that's yours, a place where kindness gets to come home." She looked at the house again. It wasn't grand or flashy, but there was something deeply sincere about it. The windows glowed faintly with sunlight, and the porch had two old rocking chairs. "I can't accept it," she said, though her voice trembled. "You don't have to," he replied. "It's yours whether you live in it or not. I just needed you to know what you did mattered." She looked at him then, really looked. Past the man who had collapsed on a street, past the uncertainty and the quiet sadness he carried like an old coat. What she saw now was a man trying to be more than he'd been, trying to honor something that had changed him. "Why this?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I used to pass this house all the time," he said. "When things were bad, I used to wonder what kind of people lived in a place like this. People with calm lives, warm kitchens, good hearts. I wanted to believe I could belong somewhere like that." He looked at her with something unspoken behind his eyes. "You made me believe." The wind stirred between them. A leaf skittered across the walkway. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime clinked softly. "Come inside," he said, "at least see it." She hesitated, then followed him up the porch steps. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for her. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint and wood polish. The rooms were simple, sunlit, clean. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the windowsill in the kitchen. He let her walk through in silence. When she returned to the front room, he was waiting by the door as if ready to leave her to it. "You can stay as long as you like," he said, "or never come back, it's okay." She looked at him, a strange ache rising in her throat. "Do you live here?" He shook his head. "No, I couldn't, it's not mine." She stepped closer. "Jack." But the words failed. He smiled gently, that same soft expression he'd worn in the hospital when she adjusted his oxygen line. "I'm glad you came," he said. And then he left, leaving the door open behind him. The house sat with her. Elinor didn't return right away. She locked the door behind her and walked home that evening with the key still pressed into her palm, her thoughts turning over like pages in a restless book. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to do with someone else's kindness. It was easier, somehow, when she was the one giving it, receiving something that had no strings, no conditions, that unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. But the house stayed in her mind. Days passed, she went back to work, folded linens, gave pain meds, held the hand of a woman whose husband had slipped into a coma, and helped a little boy with brittle bones smile again with purple bandages and glitter stickers. She was good at that, giving others what she never asked for herself. Then one Thursday morning, she took the key from her nightstand and rode the bus back to Rose Hill. The house looked just as she remembered, still, quiet, waiting. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing slightly against the floors. A bird called from somewhere outside, and light spilled across the wooden floorboards in long golden stripes. It didn't feel like someone else's house anymore. It felt like something unfinished, like a beginning. She started slow. One box of books from her apartment, a framed photo of her parents, her mother in nurse's scrubs, her father holding a coffee cup and laughing, a blanket she'd kept since college. The days blurred. She moved in without making a decision about it. There was no defining moment, no ceremony. She just began to show up. On a rainy afternoon, she stood barefoot in the kitchen unpacking dishes when there was a knock at the door. She opened it and found Jack, holding a small brown paper bag and dripping water from his sleeves. "You moved in," he said, surprised but not unkindly. "I didn't plan to," she said, brushing a damp curl from her forehead, "but I think I needed to." He held up the bag. "I brought lemon muffins. I wasn't sure if it was a good time." She stepped back. "Come in." They sat at the tiny table in the kitchen, the rain ticking gently against the windows. The muffins were soft and slightly warm, and she wondered if he had baked them himself. He didn't say. "This place suits you," he said after a while. "I think I'm still figuring out what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything," he said. "It just has to hold you." She looked at him, studying the way his hands rested on the edge of the table. There were new calluses on his palms, fresh from work. "You look better," she said, "healthier." "I feel it," he paused. "I got a job, renovation crew, not glamorous but honest." "That's good." "Yeah," he glanced at the floor, then back at her. "I wanted you to know I didn't just disappear. I meant what I said, that this house was for you." She nodded, heart tight. "You don't owe me anything, Jack." "I know, but I'm glad you came back." He smiled then, not a wide smile but a quiet, grounded one, like something in him had settled. He started visiting sometimes, never too often. Just enough that his presence became a soft part of her life, a coffee left on the porch with her name scrawled on the lid, a new tea towel with sunflowers printed on it, a hammer and level when she tried to hang shelves and failed spectacularly. They talked about ordinary things mostly, whether books, her patients, the garden he was helping build in a nearby community center. But every so often, the conversation would slip beneath the surface. One night after dinner, she asked, "Why were you out there that night?" His eyes didn't leave his cup. "I'd lost a job. My last check had gone to rent. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. I remember thinking if I just sat down on that sidewalk, maybe everything would stop spinning. And then it did." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "You're not that man anymore," she said. He looked up at her, something unspoken flickering in his expression. "I'm not sure I was ever meant to survive." "You were," she said. "You did." They sat in silence, hands resting in that small space between grief and grace. Spring turned to early summer. The garden out front began to bloom. Eleanor planted zinnias and lavender, even though she knew very little about gardening. Jack helped, without asking, without pushing. Just showed up with mulch and gloves and stood beside her while they worked side by side, arms brushing when they reached for the same tool. It was during one of those evenings, soil still under her nails, that she found herself leaning into his shoulder as they sat on the porch. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. She realized then that love didn't have to arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it came quietly, in the way someone returned again and again, until their presence felt like sunlight. She didn't say it out loud, but she didn't have to. July brought longer days and air warm enough to leave windows open through the night. The little white house on Rose Hill breathed easier in summer, its rooms slowly filling with the rhythm of Eleanor's quiet life, morning coffee and bare feet, humming while folding laundry, handwritten grocery lists clipped to the fridge. There were still shifts at the hospital, still late nights holding the hands of strangers, still grief that clung to her clothes like the faint smell of antiseptic. But now there was also something else. Jack came over most evenings. He always brought something: peaches from the market, a cracked record he'd found at a thrift store, once a dented watering can with chipped blue paint and a bouquet of daisies tucked inside. He never asked for anything in return. Just sat with her on the porch or helped her patch the fence or told her stories about the places he'd lived before, like pieces of a map she was slowly learning to read. He never tried to define what was growing between them, neither did she. But it was there in the things unsaid, the way he looked for her in every room, the way she set aside 2 mugs now instead of one. The quiet trust they moved with, it felt fragile and real all at once. One evening, the hospital called. It was just past midnight. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table in Jack's hoodie, flipping through an old novel with one light on. She answered on the first ring. "There's been a car accident," the charge nurse said. "One of ours, it's Eric, he asked for you." Eric had been a nurse in the ER longer than her. Kind, steady, always sneaking candy from the med carts. Now he lay in a trauma room of his own, and Eleanor moved like she was floating through fog. She stayed with him through the night, holding pressure on a wound until her fingers cramped, whispering to him until he was stable enough to breathe without the machine. When she finally walked home near dawn, her scrubs soaked through with blood and worry, she found Jack waiting on her porch steps. He stood as soon as he saw her. "You didn't call," he said softly. "I couldn't. Come here." She went. He wrapped his arms around her, not asking questions, not needing words, just held her as she let herself break. For the first time in years, she cried into someone's shoulder, not for herself, not really, but for all of it, the fear, the fatigue, the way this life could hollow you out and still be so impossibly worth it. Later, when she sat curled on the couch in fresh clothes and silence, Jack brought her tea and sat beside her. I've been thinking, he said, about something I haven't told you. She looked at him, weary but open. That night, he said, before I collapsed, I'd been walking past the hospital. I almost went in, almost asked for help, but I didn't think I was worth saving. You were, she said, with no hesitation. He nodded. It took me a while to believe that, but now, sometimes I think the universe put me in your hands for a reason. She reached for his hand, fitting her fingers between his. I think maybe it put you in mine for one too. He kissed her that night. It wasn't planned, it wasn't polished, but it was full of the kind of truth that comes from surviving something together. After that, their lives began to stitch together in small, solid ways. A drawer in her room for his things, his toothbrush beside hers, her laughter more frequent, his shoulders lighter. One late August evening, they hosted a small dinner on the porch. Some coworkers from the hospital, a few neighbors, the kids from the garden program Jack had started volunteering with. Alina watched him laugh with a boy who had trouble speaking, watched him tie a napkin around the neck of an elderly guest who dropped food on his shirt. She leaned against the porch railing, a glass of lemonade in her hand, and felt a fullness bloom in her chest. After everyone left, the stars came out. Jack joined her on the steps, handing her a slice of peach pie. This was supposed to be your house, she said. It is, he said, it just needed you in it. She looked around, at the creaky floorboards and blooming flowers, at the dent in the hallway wall where she'd dropped a painting, at the way everything inside now carried their fingerprints. It feels like home, she said. That's all I wanted. She reached for his hand. You saved me too, not with a house, just by staying. I'll keep staying, he said, as long as you let me. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the night warm around them, the cicadas humming their steady song. This wasn't the kind of story most people talked about. No fairy tale, no grand confessions, just two people who had fallen into each other's orbit at the exact moment they needed someone to believe they mattered. A nurse who refused to let a man slip away. A man who returned not with promises but with a key and a quiet kind of love that rebuilt everything she hadn't realized was broken. Alina closed her eyes, breathing in the soft night air. He was still here. That meant everything.